The morning I found her earring under my pillow was the morning everything changed. Not his pillow, not tangled in the sheets, somewhere neutral. Mine, my pillow, where I laid my head every night, trusting the man sleeping beside me. The delicate, silver hoop caught the early sunlight streaming through our bedroom window, and for a moment, I stared at it like it was some alien artifact that had fallen from another planet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I knew it wasn't mine. I'd never worn silver jewelry. David knew I was allergic, had known for 8 years of marriage, 12 years together. The rash it gave me was instant and angry, something we'd discovered on our third date when he'd surprised me with silver bracelet. He'd felt so guilty about my reaction that he'd made me promise to always tell him about things like that, about anything that could hurt me. Standing there in my silk pajamas, the earring balanced on my palm, I realized he'd forgotten that promise, or maybe he just didn't care anymore. The earring belonged to Nicole Torres. I knew this with the same certainty that I knew my own name. David's new project manager at Hayes and Bradley Construction. The woman who had been working late with my husband 3 nights a week for the past 2 months. The woman who called our house phone at dinner time, her voice honeyed and apologetic, as she explained that they needed to go over blueprints just one more time. I'd met Nicole exactly once, at the company barbecue 6 months ago. She was 28 to my 35, with dark hair that caught light like silk, and a smile that made grown men forget their own names. I'd watched her work the crowd that day, gravitating toward the married men while their wives fetched drinks or chased children. David had introduced us with obvious pride, his hand lingering on the small of her back as he explained how lucky they were to have found someone with her expertise. I'd smiled and made small talk about the weather, about the delicious potato salad, about anything except the way my husband's eyes followed her movements, or how she touched his arm when she laughed at his jokes. I'd perfected the art of pretending, not to notice things that threatened my carefully constructed world. But earrings don't lie. Earrings don't gaslight you or make you question your own sanity. They exist in absolutes. I placed the silver hoop on my nightstand and walked to the kitchen, where David sat drinking coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I entered, his expression warm and familiar. This was the face I'd fallen in love with in college, the man who'd proposed to me on the beach at sunset, who'd held my hand through his father's funeral and promised we'd build something beautiful together. "Morning, beautiful," he said, reaching for my hand as I passed his chair. "Sleep well?" His fingers were warm and calloused from years of construction work. I'd always loved his hands, the way they could build something, from nothing, fix anything that was broken, except apparently, us. "Fine," I lied, pouring myself coffee with steady hands. "What time did you get in last night?" He didn't even pause. "Around 11. Nicole and I finally figured out the electrical issues with the Morrison project. Sorry if I woke you coming in." The Morrison project. Always the Morrison project. For 2 months, that house had required more attention than a newborn baby. Every delay, every complication, every late-night emergency seemed to revolve around that particular build. I'd started to hate the very sound of the name Morrison. "That's good," I said, taking a sip of coffee that tasted like ash. "That you figured it out." David smiled, already turning back to his phone. "Nicole's amazing with electrical systems. I don't know what we did before we hired her." The casual way he said her name made my stomach clench. Nicole. Like she was family. Someone whose presence in our lives was natural and welcome. Not the woman whose earring had spent the night in my bed. I watched him for a moment, noting the way he'd styled his hair with more care than usual. The fact that he was wearing the cologne I'd bought him for Christmas. Cologne that had sat untouched on his dresser for months. His wedding ring caught the light as he typed. The white gold band we'd chosen together at a small jewelry store in downtown Riverside. We'd been so young then, so certain that love was enough to weather any storm. "I need to run some errands." "Today," I said, testing the waters. "Thought I might drive up to Portland, visit some of the design studios downtown." This got his attention. David looked up, frowning slightly. "Design studios? What for?" For 8 years, I'd put my career in interior design on hold to support his business. When we'd married, Hayes Construction was struggling, still bearing the weight of his father's medical bills and outdated practices. I'd used my contacts and creative skills to help modernize their approach, bringing in residential clients who wanted both quality construction and sophisticated design. I'd turned down job offers in Portland, ignored headhunters who called with opportunities that would have doubled my salary. I'd told myself it was temporary, that once the business was stable, I'd return to my own career. But stability had turned into expansion, and expansion had turned into a demanding schedule that always seemed to require David's attention elsewhere. My own dreams had been carefully folded away, like seasonal clothes stored in the attic. "Just looking," I said. "I miss it sometimes. The creative work." David's expression softened, but I caught the flicker of annoyance before he could hide it. "Lauren, you know how crazy things are right now. With Nicole just getting settled and all these new projects, I really need you focused on supporting the business. Maybe after the Morrison house is finished? Always after. After this project, after that deadline, after some mythical future, when he'd have time to remember that I existed beyond my usefulness to his company." "Of course," I agreed, because it was easier than fighting. "Just a thought." He reached for my hand again, squeezing gently. "I appreciate everything you do. You know that, right? I couldn't manage any of this without you." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a cage made of guilt and obligation. I managed a smile and excused myself to get dressed, leaving him to his phone and his coffee and his carefully constructed lies. Back in our bedroom, I stared at the earring on my nightstand. Such a small thing to shatter. An entire world. I thought about the hours I'd spent decorating this room, choosing paint colors and fabrics that would make it feel like a sanctuary. The antique quilt I'd found at a estate sale, the photographs of our trips together arranged on the dresser, the reading nook by the window where I'd planned to spend lazy Sunday mornings with books and coffee. All of it felt contaminated now. How many times had Nicole been in this room? How many nights had they used my carefully chosen sanctuary for their betrayal? My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Clark, my best friend since high school. "Coffee this afternoon? I have gossip." Amanda worked as a nurse at Pinewood Medical Center and always had stories about the small-town drama that swirled through Riverside like morning fog. Usually I found her updates amusing, a harmless way to stay connected to a community I'd never quite felt part of. Today, I wondered if I was about to become the subject of someone else's gossip. I texted back that I'd meet her at the Riverfront Cafe at 2 o'clock, then spent the rest of the morning moving through my usual routine like a sleepwalker. I organized David's files, returned calls from suppliers, and updated the company's social media with photos of their latest completed project. I played the role of the supportive wife with practiced ease, all while the silver earring burned like a brand in my peripheral vision. The afternoon sun was bright when I arrived at the cafe, one of those perfect October days that made the Pacific Northwest feel like paradise. Amanda was already waiting at our usual table by the window, her red hair catching the light as she waved me over. She'd been my anchor through every major life event, the one person who'd never asked me to be anything other than myself. "You look terrible," she said as I sat down, her green eyes immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" Amanda had the kind of directness that came from years of dealing with medical emergencies. She didn't waste time on pleasantries when someone was clearly in distress. I'd always appreciated this about her, the way she cut straight through social niceties to the heart of things. "I found something this morning," I said, pulling the earring from my purse and placing it on the table between us. Amanda stared at it for a moment, then looked back at my face. "That's not yours." "No." "Where did you find it?" "Under my pillow." The silence stretched between us as Amanda processed this information. I watched her face cycle through several emotions: surprise, anger, protective fury, before settling into the kind of grim determination I'd seen her wear during medical crises. "The new project manager," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, surprised that she'd made the connection so quickly. "Nicole Torres." Amanda leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "How long have you suspected?" "I haven't," I admitted. "I mean, part of me noticed things. The late nights, the phone calls, the way he talks about her. But I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining problems that didn't exist. Lauren. Amanda's voice was gentle but firm. You're not paranoid. You're observant. There's a difference. I thought about all the small betrayals I'd dismissed over the past few months. The way David's phone was suddenly always face down on tables. The new password protection that he'd explained away as a security measure for work files. The subtle changes in our intimacy. The feeling that his mind was elsewhere even when his body was present. What am I supposed to do? I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Confront him? Demand answers? Storm into his office and make a scene? Amanda was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee with more attention than it required. What do you want to do? The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? For months, maybe years, I'd been so focused on what David needed, what the business required, what everyone else expected, that I'd forgotten to consider my own desires. I want to disappear, I said finally. I want to pack a bag and drive until I reach somewhere nobody knows my name or my story. So why don't you? I stared at her. Because I can't just abandon everything. The business needs me. David's mother depends on me. I can't just run away because I found an earring. Can't you? Amanda leaned forward, her expression intense. Lauren, you've spent 8 years building a life around someone else's dreams. You've put your career on hold, your happiness on hold, your entire identity on hold. And now you're finding evidence that he's been sharing your bed with another woman. What exactly are you trying to save? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Her words hit like physical blows. I'd been so careful not to think about the larger implications, focusing instead on the immediate crisis, the logistics of discovery and confrontation. But Amanda was right. What was I fighting for? A marriage that had become a business partnership? A man who'd forgotten that I was more than just a convenient accessory to his success? Margaret, I said weakly. David's mother. She's been like family to me since my parents died. I can't just abandon her. Amanda's expression softened. Margaret Hayes was 83 years old and had been battling diabetes and heart problems for the past 2 years. She'd welcomed me into the family with open arms from the very beginning, treating me like the daughter she'd never had. The thought of losing that relationship felt almost as devastating as losing my marriage. Margaret loves you for who you are, not because you're married to her son, Amanda said gently. Don't you think she'd want you to be happy? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from David. Working late again tonight. Nicole found some issues with the electrical plans that need immediate attention. Don't wait up. I showed the message to Amanda, who shook her head in disgust. He's not even trying to be creative with his lies anymore. The casual arrogance of it struck me like a slap. David wasn't even bothering to construct believable excuses. He'd grown comfortable with my acceptance, confident that I'd never question his explanations or demand accountability. I was the reliable wife who managed his business affairs and asked no inconvenient questions about his personal life. I need to know for sure, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Before I make any decisions, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. Amanda nodded approvingly. What do you want to do? That evening, I did something I'd never done in 8 years of marriage. I followed my husband. I waited until his truck disappeared around the corner, then got in my car and drove to the Morrison Project site, a sprawling suburban development on the outskirts of Riverside where Hayes and Bradley was building their largest contract to date. David's truck was parked outside the model home, along with Nicole's red Honda Civic. The lights were on in the main floor, warm and inviting against the gathering dusk. I parked across the street and waited, feeling like a character in someone else's story. They emerged 40 minutes later, and I watched my husband of 8 years kiss another woman goodbye in the golden circle of a streetlight. Not a friendly peck on the cheek or a professional handshake, but a lingering kiss full of promise and familiarity. Nicole's hands tangled in his hair, the same hair I'd been running my fingers through since college. They stood there for several minutes, talking in low voices, touching each other with the casual intimacy of established lovers. I sat in my car and watched my marriage end. When David finally pulled into our driveway at 11:30, I was already in bed, pretending to sleep. He moved quietly through our routine, brushing his teeth and changing into pajamas with the practiced stealth of someone who'd been deceiving his spouse for months. When he slipped into bed beside me, I could smell her perfume on his skin, subtle, but unmistakable. "Lauren," he whispered, testing to see if I was awake. I kept my breathing steady and even, feigning the deep sleep of the innocent and trusting. After a few minutes, he settled into his pillow with a contented sigh, the sound of a man satisfied with his evening's work. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sound of his breathing as it gradually deepened into genuine sleep. The silver earring was still on my nightstand, catching glints of moonlight through our bedroom window. Tomorrow I would have to decide what to do with this knowledge, how to reshape my life around this new understanding of who my husband really was. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve. Not just for my marriage, but for the woman I'd been, when I'd believed in forever. For all the dreams I'd deferred, and the pieces of myself I'd willingly sacrificed for someone who'd been sharing my bed with another woman. As David slept peacefully beside me, I began to plan my escape. I woke up before dawn with a clarity that surprised me. While David slept beside me, still smelling faintly of Nicole's perfume, I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to my old desk in the corner of our bedroom. It had been months since I'd opened the bottom drawer, but my fingers remembered exactly where to find the business cards I'd carefully saved over the years. Portland Design Institute, Cascade Creative Studios, Morrison and Associates Architecture. Each card represented a door I'd chosen not to walk through, a future I'd postponed indefinitely for the sake of someone else's dreams. I spread them across the desk like tarot cards, each one whispering possibilities I'd forgotten I wanted. The first call I made was to Patricia Morrison, the principal architect at Morrison and Associates. I'd met her 3 years ago at a design conference in Seattle, and we'd spent an entire evening discussing sustainable building practices and the integration of interior design with architectural planning. She'd offered me a position on the spot, but I'd declined, explaining that my husband's business needed my attention. "Lauren Hayes." Patricia's voice was warm with recognition when I called at 8 in the morning. "What a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you last week when we landed a new residential project that would be perfect for your aesthetic." I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. I was wondering if that offer might still be on the table. My circumstances have changed, and I'm ready to get back into the field. "Are you kidding? I've been hoping you'd call for 3 years. When can you start?" The conversation lasted 40 minutes, during which Patricia outlined a position that was everything I'd dreamed of and more. Senior interior design consultant with full creative control over residential projects, a salary that was nearly double what I'd been drawing from David's company, and the opportunity to work with some of the most innovative architects on the West Coast. "There's just one thing," Patricia said as we wrapped up. "The position is based here in Portland. I know you're settled in Riverside, but most of our projects require on-site presence, especially during the initial consultation and final installation phases." Portland, 2 hours north of Riverside, far enough to require a complete life change, close enough that I could still visit Margaret regularly. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like breathing after being underwater for years. "That's not a problem," I heard myself saying. "When would you need me to start?" "How does next Monday sound?" After I hung up, I sat at my desk staring out the window at the garden I'd spent 5 years cultivating. The roses were preparing for winter, their last blooms defiant against the approaching cold. I'd planted each bush with such care, planning the color combinations and seasonal rotations with the same attention I'd given to every aspect of this house. Now I found myself wondering if I'd ever see them bloom again. David stirred in bed, behind me, and I quickly gathered the business cards, slipping them into my purse before he could see them. When he opened his eyes, I was already dressed and making coffee, playing the role of the dutiful wife one more time. "You're up early," he observed, checking his phone immediately upon waking. It was a habit that had developed over the past few months, this urgent need to check messages before even saying good morning to his wife. Couldn't sleep, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Thought I'd get an early start on the Henderson project invoices. He nodded absently, already typing a response to whatever message had captured his attention. Nicole's coming by the office around 10 to review the electrical subcontractor bids. We might need to stay late again tonight if there are issues. The casual way he mentioned her name, the practiced ease of his deception, made my stomach turn. How long had this been going on? How many times had he looked me in the eye and lied with such convincing sincerity? Of course, I managed, pouring his coffee with steady hands. I'll make sure the Henderson materials are ready for your review. David smiled, already reaching for his phone again. What would I do without you? The question hung in the air between us, and I found myself wondering if he'd ever actually considered the answer. What would he do without me managing his schedules, handling his paperwork, maintaining relationships with his clients, keeping his world organized while he pursued other interests? What would happen to Hayes and Bradley Construction when its invisible partner disappeared? I spent the morning at the company office, a converted warehouse space that David and his father had renovated 15 years ago. I'd helped design the layout, choosing colors and furnishings that would make clients feel welcome while maintaining the industrial aesthetic that reflected their work. Now I moved through the familiar space like a ghost, completing tasks that would ensure a smooth transition for whoever would take over my responsibilities. I organized files, updated client contact information, and created detailed notes about ongoing projects and vendor relationships. If someone wanted to accuse me of abandoning my commitments, they'd find everything in perfect order, labeled and documented with obsessive care. Amanda called around noon, her voice carefully neutral. "How are you feeling today?" "Different," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "I made some phone calls this morning." "Good different or terrifying different?" "Both." I lowered my voice, glancing toward David's office where he was meeting with a client. I might have a job offer in Portland. Amanda was quiet for a moment. "When?" "Monday." "That's fast." "Maybe too fast," I admitted. "But I keep thinking about what you said yesterday, about what I'm trying to save, and I can't come up with a good answer." "Have you told David?" I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. He's too busy planning his evening with Nicole to notice what I'm doing during the day. At 2 o'clock, Nicole arrived for her meeting with David. I watched through the office window as she parked her red Honda, taking extra time to check her appearance in the rearview mirror before walking to the building. She wore a fitted black dress that was professional enough for the office but cut in a way that suggested other purposes. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor as she entered, and I noticed how she'd styled her hair in loose waves that caught the afternoon light. "Hi, Lauren," she said, her voice honey-sweet as she approached my desk. "Is David ready for our meeting?" Up close, I could see why David had been drawn to her. Nicole was undeniably beautiful, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to doubt her effect on men. But there was something calculating in her eyes, an awareness of her power that made my skin crawl. "He's just finishing a call," I said, keeping my voice professionally pleasant. "He'll be right with you." Nicole perched on the edge of my desk, her perfume filling the space between us. It was the same scent I'd smelled on David's clothes, exotic and expensive. "I love what you've done with this space," she said, gesturing around the office. "David told me you designed it. You have such a good eye." The compliment felt like a slap wrapped in silk. Here was the woman who was sleeping with my husband, praising the work I'd done to build his business, the life they were both systematically destroying. "Thank you," I managed, my hands steady as I shuffled papers on my desk. "You know," Nicole continued, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "David talks about you all the time. How talented you are, how much the business depends on you. He's so lucky to have such a supportive wife." The words were carefully chosen, designed to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. She knew that I knew, or at least suspected, and she was testing my reaction, seeing how far she could push before I broke. David's office door opened before I could respond, and he emerged with his client, a middle-aged woman who was renovating her kitchen. I watched him turn on the charm, the same easy charisma that had won my heart 12 years ago. He walked the client to the door, promised to have revised estimates by Friday, and made her feel like the most important person in his world. Then, his attention turned to Nicole, and his entire demeanor shifted. The professional mask slipped, replaced by something warmer and more intimate. He touched her elbow as he guided her toward his office, and I saw her lean into the contact with practiced ease. "Will probably be a while," he called over his shoulder to me. "These electrical issues are pretty complex." I nodded and smiled, playing my part in their charade while my world crumbled around me. The office door closed behind them, and I was left alone with the sound of their muffled laughter filtering through the walls. That's when I made the second call of the day, this one to a real estate agent in Portland. Diane Fletcher had been recommended by Patricia Morrison as someone who specialized in helping professionals relocate quickly. Within an hour, she'd sent me listings for 3 furnished apartments available for immediate occupancy. "I know it's sudden," I explained during our phone conversation, "but I need to be settled by this weekend. Money isn't the primary concern." "I understand completely," Diane said, and something in her tone suggested she'd handled similar situations before. "Life changes can't always wait for perfect timing. I have a beautiful 1-bedroom in the Pearl District that would be perfect for someone in your situation. The building has excellent security, and the previous tenant was also a design professional, so it's already set up with good workspace lighting." Security. The word resonated in ways I hadn't expected. When had I started feeling unsafe in my own life? When had David's presence become something to guard against, rather than find comfort in? By 5 o'clock, I'd signed a lease electronically, and arranged for movers to pack my personal belongings on Saturday morning. Everything was happening with the surreal speed of a dream, but each decision felt more right than anything I'd done in years. David and Nicole finally emerged from his office at 6:30, both looking satisfied and slightly disheveled. Nicole's lipstick had been refreshed, and David was wearing the relaxed expression of a man who'd had a very productive afternoon. "We made real progress on those electrical plans," he announced, his voice carrying just a hint of theatrical emphasis. "Nicole's innovative thinking saved us from some major complications." Nicole beamed at the praise, touching his arm in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "We make a good team," she said, her eyes meeting mine for just a moment. The challenge in her gaze was unmistakable. I gathered my purse and jacket, exhaustion suddenly weighing on my shoulders like a physical presence. "I'm going to head home and start dinner," I said, the words automatic after years of routine. "Actually," David said, his tone carefully casual, "Nicole and I need to make a site visit to the Morrison project. There might be some issues with the foundation that require immediate attention." More lies, delivered with the same convincing sincerity I'd fallen for countless times before. But now I could see the calculation behind his words, the way he constructed each deception with just enough detail to seem plausible while leaving room for future modifications. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "Don't wait up for me. I might go visit Margaret after dinner." David's expression brightened. "That's a great idea. She's been asking about you." The mention of his mother sent a pang of genuine grief through my chest. Margaret Hayes had been the closest thing to a mother I'd had since my parents died in a car accident during my junior year of college. She'd welcomed me into the family with open arms, teaching me her secret recipes, and sharing stories about David's childhood. The thought of losing that relationship felt almost as devastating as losing my marriage. I drove home through the familiar streets of Riverside, past the coffee shop where David and I had had our first date, past the church where we'd been married, past all the landmarks of a life I was preparing to abandon. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made the Pacific Northwest feel like paradise. But I found myself looking at everything through the lens of goodbye. At home, I moved through the evening routine with mechanical precision. I heated leftovers for dinner, sorted through the mail, and loaded the dishwasher while mentally cataloging which items I would take and which I would leave behind. The antique clock on the mantel that had belonged to my grandmother, definitely. The wedding china we'd never used, probably not. Around 8 o'clock, I drove to Pinewood Medical Center to visit Margaret. I found her in the Cardiac Rehabilitation Center, working with a physical therapist on exercises designed to strengthen her heart after her most recent episode. At 83, she remained sharp and determined, fighting her declining health with the same stubborn resilience that had carried her through widowhood and single motherhood. "Lauren, honey," she exclaimed when she saw me, her face lighting up with genuine joy. What a wonderful surprise. I helped her complete her exercises, Then we settled in the small garden area adjacent to the rehab center. Margaret had always loved flowers, and even here in the sterile medical environment, she'd found ways to nurture small pots of herbs and succulents on the windowsills. "You look tired, dear," she observed, studying my face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent decades reading people's emotions. "Is everything all right with you and David?" The question caught me off guard. Margaret had never been one to pry into our personal lives, but she'd also never been one to miss important details. I wondered what she'd noticed. What small signs had accumulated to trigger her concern? "We're going through a difficult period," I said carefully, not wanting to burden her with the full truth but unable to lie completely. "I'm thinking about making some changes in my life." Margaret reached for my hand, her fingers thin but surprisingly strong. "Sometimes changes are necessary, even when they're painful," she said quietly. "I learned that when David's father died. I thought I couldn't survive without him, but I discovered strengths I didn't know I had." We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the afternoon light fade through the garden windows. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "You know, Lauren, I've watched you for 8 years now, and I've seen how you've supported David, how you've put your own dreams aside to help him build his business. You've been a wonderful wife and daughter-in-law, but I sometimes worry that you've forgotten to take care of yourself." The observation was so gentle and accurate that I felt tears threatening for the first time since finding the earring. "I don't know how to do anything else," I admitted. "I've been taking care of other people for so long that I'm not sure who I am on my own." Margaret squeezed my hand. "Then maybe it's time to find out," she said simply. "You're still young, Lauren. You have time to discover what makes you happy, what fulfills you beyond taking care of everyone else." On the drive home, I thought about Margaret's words and realized she'd given me something I hadn't expected. Permission. Permission to put myself first, to prioritize my own happiness, to stop measuring my worth by how well I served other people's needs. David's truck was in the driveway when I arrived home, which surprised me. According to his story, he should have been at the Morrison site dealing with foundation issues until late in the evening. I found him in the living room, freshly showered, and wearing clean clothes, watching television with the relaxed posture of someone who'd had a quiet evening at home. "How was Margaret?" he asked without looking away from the screen. "Good. Tired, but good." I settled into the chair across from him, studying his profile in the flickering light from the television. "I thought you were going to be late tonight." "The foundation issues weren't as serious as we thought," he said smoothly. "Nicole and I were able to resolve everything pretty quickly." Another lie, delivered with practiced ease. I wondered if he'd always been this skilled at deception, or if it was a talent he'd developed specifically for managing his double life. Either way, the casual nature of his dishonesty revealed just how little respect he had for my intelligence. "That's good," I said, my voice neutral. "I'm glad it wasn't a major problem." We watched television in silence for another hour, two people sharing a living room but occupying completely separate worlds. David seemed relaxed and content, occasionally chuckling at something on screen, apparently untroubled by any guilt about his afternoon activities. I found myself studying him like a stranger, trying to reconcile this man with the person I'd thought I'd married. When had he become someone capable of such sustained deception? Had I simply been too trusting to see the signs, or had he genuinely changed over the course of our marriage? The questions felt academic now. Whatever David had been, or might have been, I could see clearly who he was in this moment. A man who'd grown comfortable with lies, who'd convinced himself that his wife's ignorance was more important than her dignity. Around 10 o'clock, I excused myself to take a bath, claiming exhaustion from a long day. In the bathroom, I allowed myself to really look in the mirror for the first time in months. The woman staring back at me looked older than 35, worn down by years of subjugating her own needs to someone else's priorities. But underneath the fatigue, I could see something else, a spark of determination that had been dormant for too long. I was done being the woman who made everyone else's life easier while slowly disappearing herself. I was done with the careful smiles and diplomatic silences, the endless accommodations and unacknowledged sacrifices. I was done being married to a man who could lie to my face while planning his next rendezvous with another woman. The hot water felt like baptism, washing away the last remnants of the person I'd been, and preparing me for whoever I was about to become. Tomorrow, I would start the process of reclaiming my life. Tomorrow, I would stop being David Hayes's convenient wife and start being Lauren Hayes, whoever she turned out to be. But tonight, I would allow myself to grieve for the dreams we'd shared and the future we'd never have. I would mourn the marriage I'd thought we had, and the man I'd believed he was, and then I would pack my bags and prepare for the most terrifying and necessary journey of my life. The journey back to myself. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made Riverside feel smaller and more claustrophobic than usual. I'd barely slept, my mind racing through the logistics of my escape plan and the conversation I knew I had to have with David before I disappeared. The movers were scheduled for tomorrow morning, and Patricia Morrison expected me in Portland by Monday. Everything was accelerating toward a point of no return. David was already in the shower when I woke, humming an old song we used to dance to in our kitchen during the early years of our marriage. The casual happiness in his voice made my stomach clench. How could he be so content while systematically destroying everything we'd built together? How could he hum love songs while planning to spend another evening with his mistress? I made coffee and toast, going through the motions of our morning routine while my heart hammered against my ribs. Today felt different, charged with the electricity of an approaching storm. I had the strange sensation that I was watching myself from outside my body, observing the final performance of a role I'd played for 8 years. "Big day ahead," David announced as he joined me in the kitchen, adjusting his tie with the care of a man who wanted to look good for someone. "Nicole and I are doing the final walkthrough on the Morrison house with the buyers. If everything goes well, we should be able to close on Monday." The Morrison house. The project that had provided the perfect cover for their affair. The fictional crisis that had justified months of late nights and urgent meetings. I wondered if they'd chosen the location deliberately, if they'd planned their deception around that particular build, or if opportunity had simply presented itself, and they'd seized it. "That's wonderful," I heard myself say. "You've worked so hard on that project." David smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We've worked hard on it. I couldn't have managed any of this without your support, Lauren. You know that, right?" The gesture should have been comforting, but his touch felt like a betrayal now. These were the same hands that had caressed Nicole's skin. The same fingers that had traced intimate patterns on another woman's body. I forced myself not to pull away, maintaining the facade for just a little longer. "Of course," I murmured, extricating my hand under the pretense of reaching for my coffee mug. My phone rang before David could respond, Amanda's name flashing on the screen. I excused myself to take the call in the living room, grateful for any interruption to the suffocating atmosphere of false domesticity. "Emergency," Amanda said without preamble. "Can you meet me at the hospital? Margaret's been admitted." The world tilted sideways. What happened? "She collapsed during physical therapy this morning. Dr. Wells thinks it might be another cardiac episode, but they're running tests now. She's stable, but she's been asking for you." I grabbed my purse and jacket, calling over my shoulder to David that I was going to the hospital. He looked up from his phone with what appeared to be genuine concern, but I was already out the door. My mind focused entirely on Margaret, and the terrifying possibility that I might lose her just as I was preparing to leave. Pinewood Medical Center felt different in crisis mode, the familiar hallways charged with urgency and purpose. I found Amanda waiting in the cardiac wing, her nurse's uniform wrinkled from a long shift. She pulled me into a quick hug before leading me toward Margaret's room. "She's conscious and alert," Amanda explained as we walked. "The preliminary tests don't show any immediate damage, but Dr. Wells wants to keep her under observation for at least 48 hours. Her blood pressure spiked during therapy, and given her history, they're not taking any chances." Margaret looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines that seemed to emphasize her mortality. But her eyes were bright when she saw me, and she managed a weak smile as I approached her bedside. "There's my girl," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I'm sorry to scare everyone. I just got a little dizzy during exercises." I took her hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "Don't apologize. I'm just glad you're okay. How are you? Feeling? Foolish mostly. All this fuss over a little dizziness." Margaret's fingers squeezed mine with surprising strength. But I'm glad you're here. I was hoping we could continue our conversation from yesterday. Before I could respond, David burst through the room, his face flushed and his hair disheveled, as if he'd run from the parking lot. Mom, thank God you're all right. I got here as soon as I could. The relief in his voice seemed genuine, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the man I'd fallen in love with, the son who adored his mother and would drop everything to be at her side. But then I noticed the way he checked his phone even as he approached her bed, the slight impatience in his movements that suggested he was calculating how long this crisis would interfere with his other plans. I'm fine, sweetheart, Margaret assured him, though her eyes remained focused on my face. Just gave everyone a little scare. Lauren's been taking good care of me. David glanced at me as if just remembering I was in the room. Of course she has. Lauren's always there when we need her. The casual dismissal in his tone made my chest tighten. Even here, in his mother's hospital room, I was reduced to my functional role rather than being acknowledged as a person with my own feelings and fears. I was the reliable support system, the woman who could be counted on to handle emotional crises while he attended to more important matters. Dr. Wells arrived to discuss Margaret's condition, explaining that while her immediate situation was stable, the episode indicated that her heart was continuing to weaken. He recommended adjustments to her medication and suggested that she might benefit from having family nearby during her recovery period. I'll stay with her tonight, I offered immediately, and however long she needs support. Margaret's face lit up with gratitude, but I caught David's quick frown of annoyance. Lauren, that's not necessary, he said smoothly. The hospital staff can monitor her condition. You don't need to disrupt your whole schedule. It's no disruption, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. Margaret is family. Something flickered across David's expression, a moment of calculation that made my skin crawl. I realized he was weighing Margaret's needs against his own plans, measuring the inconvenience of having his wife unavailable against whatever evening he'd arranged with Nicole. Well, if you're sure, he said finally. I should probably go back to the office. The Morrison walkthrough is crucial, and I can't reschedule with the buyers. Of course he couldn't. The fictional emergency that had provided cover for his affair was now more important than his mother's actual medical crisis. I watched him kiss Margaret's forehead and promised to visit again soon, his performance perfectly calibrated to suggest dutiful concern while establishing his excuse for absence. Take care of her, he said to me as he prepared to leave, his hand briefly touching my shoulder in a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate. After David left, Margaret studied my face with the sharp perception that age and experience had given her. You're leaving him, aren't you? She said quietly. The directness of the question caught me off guard. I'd planned to tell her about my decision, but not here. Not while she was connected to monitors and recovering from a cardiac episode. Margaret, I don't think this is the time. Lauren, honey, I'm 83 years old and I just had another heart episode. If not now, when? Her voice was gentle but firm. I've been watching you both for months, and I can see that something's wrong. David's been distracted and secretive, and you've been fading away like morning mist. Tears I'd been holding back for days finally spilled over. There's someone else, I whispered. Another woman. I found evidence, and I've seen them together. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a sadness that suggested she wasn't entirely surprised by this revelation. I was afraid of something like this, she said softly. David's always been charming, but he was spoiled as a child. His father and I probably made excuses for him too often, taught him that his wants were more important than other people's feelings. The admission hung between us, a mother's honest assessment of her son's character flaws. I'd never heard Margaret speak critically of David before, and her words carried the weight of years of observation and growing concern. I'm sorry, Lauren. I'm so very sorry. You deserved better than this. Better than him. I don't know what to do, I confessed. I have a job offer in Portland, an apartment, a chance to start over. But leaving means losing you, and I can't bear that thought. Margaret's grip on my hand tightened. Oh, my dear girl, you're not losing me. Geography can't change the love between us. I'll always be your family, no matter where you live or what choices you make. We talked for another hour, Margaret sharing stories about her own difficult decisions and the courage it had taken to rebuild her life after David's father died. She spoke about the importance of choosing happiness over security, of following your own path even when it disappointed other people. "Promise me something," she said as visiting hours drew to a close. "Promise me you won't stay in a marriage that makes you unhappy just because you're afraid of change. Life is too short and too precious to spend it pretending to be content." I promised, and meant it. Margaret fell asleep shortly after, her breathing steady and peaceful despite the machines monitoring her vital signs. I settled into the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, planning to keep vigil through the night. Around 9 o'clock, Amanda appeared with coffee and sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria. "Thought you might need sustenance," she said, settling into the second chair. "How's she doing?" "Better. And she knows about David." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "You told her?" She guessed. "Apparently we haven't been as good at hiding the problems as I thought." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Margaret sleep and listening to the quiet sounds of the hospital at night. Finally, Amanda spoke, her voice carefully neutral. "There's something you should know about the Morrison house." My stomach clenched. "What about it?" "My cousin Jake works for the electrical contractor on that project. According to him, the house has been finished for weeks. All the inspections passed, all the work completed. There haven't been any electrical issues or foundation problems." The words hit like physical blows. All of David's explanations, all the urgent meetings and critical deadlines, had been complete fabrications. He'd constructed an elaborate fiction to justify his affair, counting on my trust and lack of industry knowledge to accept his lies without question. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Jake mentioned it last week, but I wasn't sure if it was relevant until now. I didn't want to worry you if I was wrong." But she hadn't been wrong. David's entire cover story was a house of cards built on lies and careful manipulation. The Morrison project had provided the perfect excuse because I had no way to verify his claims, no reason to doubt the technical explanations he offered with such confident authority. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Mom seems stable. Staying late to finish Morrison details. Don't wait up." I showed the message to Amanda, who shook her head in disgust. He's not even trying to be creative anymore. The casual cruelty of it overwhelmed me. Here I was, spending the night at his mother's bedside while she recovered from a cardiac episode, and David was using the crisis as an opportunity to spend more time with his mistress. He'd actually left his sick mother to pursue his affair, calculating that my presence would provide adequate cover for his absence. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't pretend to be okay with this level of disrespect and deception." Amanda reached over and squeezed my hand. "Then don't. You have a plan. You have a job waiting. You have people who care about you. Stop protecting someone who's shown you exactly how little you mean to him." At midnight, my phone rang again. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity won, and I stepped into the hallway to take the call. "How's Mom doing?" he asked, and I could hear music and voices in the background, the sound of a party or celebration. "She's sleeping, stable but weak." I kept my voice neutral, clinical. "Where are you?" "It sounds loud." "Oh, we finished the walkthrough, and Nicole suggested celebrating at this little bar she knows. You know how it is after closing a big project." No, I didn't know how it was. In 8 years of marriage, David had never invited me to celebrate the completion of a project. Those moments of triumph had always been private affairs, shared with his work crew or business partners, but never with his wife. "Of course," I said. "Don't let me keep you from celebrating." "Thanks for understanding, Lauren. You're the best." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the empty hospital corridor. "You're the best." 4 words that summarized our entire relationship dynamic. I was the best at understanding, the best at accommodating, the best at making his life easier while my own needs went unacknowledged. I returned to Margaret's room, where Amanda was reading a magazine by the dim light of the bedside lamp. "Everything okay?" she whispered. He's celebrating at a bar with Nicole. Called to check on his mother between drinks, apparently. Amanda's expression darkened. That's it. I'm done being diplomatic about this situation. David Hayes is a selfish bastard who doesn't deserve another second of your consideration. Her vehemence was startling, but also oddly comforting. For months, I'd felt like I was going crazy, questioning my own perceptions and wondering if I was being unreasonably suspicious. Having someone else witness David's behavior and react with appropriate outrage validated my growing anger. You know what the worst part is? I said, sinking back into my chair. It's not even the affair. It's the way he's made me complicit in my own humiliation. All those nights I smiled and said I understood when he came home late. All those times I made excuses for his absence to other people. I've been helping him. Lie to me. Margaret stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible before settling back into peaceful breathing. Looking at her peaceful face, I thought about the conversation we'd had earlier. Her advice about choosing happiness over security. She'd given me permission to prioritize my own well-being, but more importantly, she'd reminded me that I had the strength to rebuild my life. I'm going to do it, I said suddenly. I'm going to leave him. Amanda smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in days. Good, it's about time. But not like this, not sneaking away while his mother is in the hospital. That would make me just as selfish as he is. So, what's your plan? I thought about it, feeling pieces of a strategy fall into place in my mind. I'm going to wait until Margaret is discharged and stable. Then I'm going to tell David exactly what I know and exactly what I'm doing. No more pretending, no more protecting his feelings, no more making his life easier at the expense of my own dignity. And then? Then I'm going to Portland to start the life I should have been living all along. We spent the rest of the night talking quietly and taking turns checking on Margaret. As dawn broke over Riverside, painting the hospital windows with soft gold light, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who had discovered Nicole's earring under her pillow was gone, replaced by someone stronger and clearer about what she deserved. David arrived around 7 in the morning, looking slightly hungover and smelling like cigarettes and perfume. He kissed his mother's forehead and made appropriate concerned noises about her condition, but I could see the impatience in his movements, the way he kept checking his phone for messages. "How was your celebration?" I asked, my tone carefully neutral. "Good. The buyers are thrilled with the house, and the contractors did excellent work. Nicole really pulled everything together beautifully." More praise for Nicole, delivered with the unconscious ease of a man who'd grown comfortable discussing his mistress with his wife. I watched him adjust his tie in the reflection of the window, preparing for another day of maintaining his double life. "I should get to the office," he said, checking his phone again. "Lots to wrap up before the official closing. Will you stay with Mom today?" "Of course." He kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt like a business transaction. "You're amazing, Lauren. I don't know what I'd do without you." As David walked away, I realized those would be the last words he'd speak to me as my husband. By the time we had our next conversation, everything would have changed. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, it felt like freedom. Margaret was discharged from the hospital on Sunday afternoon with strict instructions to rest and avoid stress. I helped her settle into her small apartment near downtown Riverside, making sure her medications were organized and her refrigerator was stocked with easy meals. She moved carefully but determinedly, refusing to be treated like an invalid despite Dr. Wells's stern warnings about her condition. "I'm not made of glass, dear," she said as I fussed over her pillows for the third time. "And you have more important things to worry about than my comfort level." She was right. Tomorrow was Monday, the day I was supposed to start my new position at Morrison & Associates in Portland. My apartment was ready, my belongings were packed, and Patricia Morrison was expecting me to begin work on a luxury residential project that would challenge every creative skill I possessed. Everything was arranged except for the conversation that would end my marriage. David had spent the weekend maintaining his usual routine of fabricated emergencies and transparent lies. He'd visited his mother exactly once, bringing flowers and staying for 20 minutes before claiming urgent business at the office. The rest of his time had been consumed by mysterious meetings and sudden crises that required immediate attention from both him and Nicole. I'd watched his performance with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying a particularly deceptive species. How had I ever believed his explanations? How had I convinced myself that his increasingly elaborate stories were anything other than carefully constructed fiction designed to facilitate his affair? Sunday evening found me alone in the house we'd shared for 8 years, surrounded by the remnants of a life I was about to abandon. David was attending another urgent meeting, this one supposedly involving potential investors for a new commercial development. The lies had become so routine that he delivered them without effort, his tone carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd never been challenged on his deceptions. I spent the evening walking through each room, saying goodbye to the spaces I'd decorated with such care and optimism. The kitchen where we'd cooked together during the early years of our marriage, before success had made David too busy for domestic intimacy. The living room where we'd hosted dinner parties and game nights, back when our social circle had included people other than his business associates. The bedroom where we'd made love and shared dreams, before those dreams had diverged into incompatible visions of the future. Each room held memories of who we'd been before ambition and routine had eroded the foundation of our relationship. But I found myself feeling nostalgic for the past, rather than devastated by the present. The woman who'd arranged these rooms no longer existed, and the man who'd shared them with her had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. My phone buzzed with a text from David at 11 o'clock. Investor meeting running very late. Don't wait up. Big day tomorrow with final. Morrison paperwork. Even his lies had become lazy, recycled variations on familiar themes. The Morrison project was closed, the investors were fictional, and the only paperwork being handled involved whatever Nicole Torres required for their evening's entertainment. I typed back a simple, "Okay," then deleted David's number from my phone. Tomorrow he would become someone I used to know, a chapter in my story rather than its central character. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like laying down a burden I'd carried for too long. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made everything seem possible. I dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd bought years ago for important business meetings, back when I'd thought I might need such things. The woman in the mirror looked professional and composed, ready to reclaim the career she'd set aside for someone else's success. David's side of the bed hadn't been slept in, which meant he'd spent the night at Nicole's apartment or some hotel room where they could play house without the inconvenience of a wife's presence. The absence that would have devastated me a week ago now felt like a gift, one less complication to navigate as I prepared for the most important conversation of my adult life. I made coffee and toast, ate slowly while watching the morning news, and waited for David to return home. He usually appeared around 8 o'clock on weekdays, freshly showered and armed with explanations for his absence. This morning would be different. This morning, his explanations would fall on ears that were no longer willing to accept comfortable lies. At 8:15, David's truck pulled into the driveway. I watched through the kitchen window as he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, checking his phone and fixing his hair in the rearview mirror. When he finally entered the house, he moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been challenged on his behavior. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek with practiced ease. "Sorry about last night. The investor meeting turned into a full planning session. You know how these things go." "Actually, I don't," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "David, we need to talk." Something in my tone must have alerted him to danger, because his expression shifted from casual affection to wary attention. "Talk about what? Is everything okay?" I pulled Nicole's earring from my pocket and placed it on the kitchen table between us. The silver caught the morning light, sparkling like a tiny accusation in the space where we'd shared thousands of meals and conversations. David stared at the earring for a long moment, his face cycling through surprise, calculation, and resignation. "Where did you find that?" "Under my pillow. In our bed. The bed where you brought your mistress while I was taking care of your mother in the hospital." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and final. David opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, apparently recognizing that his usual arsenal of explanations would be insufficient for this particular crisis. "Lauren, I can explain." "No," I interrupted, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "You can't explain this away. You can't tell me it's not what it looks like or that I'm misunderstanding the situation. I know about Nicole. I've seen you together. I know the Morrison project was finished weeks ago, and that all your urgent meetings and electrical emergencies were fabricated to cover your affair. David's face went pale, then flushed with anger. You've been spying on me? The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. I've been existing in the same space as my husband. The fact that your lies were transparent enough for me to see through them isn't spying, David. It's the inevitable result of sustained deception by someone who stopped caring enough to be convincing. It's not what you think, he said, falling back on the classic defense of caught cheaters everywhere. Nicole and I, you're just what? Friends? Colleagues? Business partners who happen to make out in public and spend nights together. At construction sites? David's expression hardened, the mask of apologetic husband slipping to reveal something uglier underneath. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Lauren. The business, the deadlines, the constant demand to be successful. Nicole understands that world in a way you never could. There it was. The core of his justification. I was the problem. The inadequate wife who couldn't appreciate the magnificent burden of his success. Nicole was the solution. The woman who understood him in ways I was apparently too limited to comprehend. You're right, I said quietly. I don't understand how someone justifies betraying the person who sacrificed her own career to build his success. I don't understand how a man can lie to his wife's face while she takes care of his sick mother. I don't understand how you can stand there and make this my fault. David's anger flared brighter. Your fault? I never said it was your fault. But you have to admit, Lauren, we've grown apart. We want different things. Maybe this is just life telling us it's time to move on. The casual way he dismissed 8 years of marriage, the easy transition from denial to acceptance, revealed everything I needed to know about his character. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake he regretted. This was who David had become. A man who took what he wanted and constructed elaborate justifications for his selfishness. You're right about one thing, I said, standing up from the table. It is time to move on. I've accepted a position with Morrison & Associates in Portland. I start today. David's mouth fell open. What? You can't be serious. You can't just leave like this. Actually, I can. I'm 35 years old. I have my own career. And I refuse to spend another day married to someone who thinks so little of me that he brings his mistress into my bed. Lauren, wait. Let's talk about this rationally. We can work through this, maybe try counseling or... We're past counseling, David. You made that choice when you decided to solve your marital problems by sleeping with someone else instead of talking to your wife. I walked toward the hallway, but David caught my arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. You can't leave me, Lauren. The business needs you. I need you. Nicole is she's just a distraction. You're my wife. The desperation in his voice was real, but it had nothing to do with love and everything to do with convenience. David needed me the way he needed his laptop or his truck, as a useful tool that made his life easier. The thought of losing his unpaid business manager and emotional caretaker was apparently more distressing than the prospect of losing his wife. Let go of me, I said quietly, and something in my tone made him release his grip immediately. Where will you live? What about the house, the business, everything we've built together? I've already found an apartment. As for the business, you'll have to figure that out with Nicole. I'm sure she'll be happy to take over my responsibilities along with my marriage. David's face contorted with frustration and growing panic. This is insane, Lauren. You're throwing away everything over a stupid mistake. No, David. You threw it away when you made the stupid mistake. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. I walked to the front door, my purse and overnight bag already waiting by the entrance. Patricia Morrison was expecting me in 3 hours, and I had a 2-hour drive ahead of me. My new life was waiting. And for the first time in years, I was excited about what the future might hold. Lauren, please, David called after me. Don't do this. We can fix this. I turned back to look at him one last time. This man I'd loved, and trusted, and built a life around. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own actions, and the loss of someone who'd made his world run smoothly. Some things can't be fixed, David. Some things can only be replaced. I walked out the door and into the crisp autumn morning, breathing deeply as I made my way to my car. Behind me, I could hear David calling my name, his voice carrying notes of anger and desperation that would have devastated me just days ago. Now they sounded like the complaints of someone who'd broken something valuable and couldn't understand why it wouldn't work anymore. As I drove through the familiar streets of Riverside for the last time, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. The GPS showed 2 hours and 14 minutes to Portland, to Patricia Morrison and the career I'd postponed, to an apartment where no one else's needs would take precedence over my own. My phone buzzed with incoming calls and text messages from David, but I didn't answer. That conversation was over. That version of my life was finished. Whatever came next would be entirely my choice, built on my own terms, answerable only to the woman I was finally ready to become. 3 months later, I stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Portland apartment, watching the city come alive in the early morning light. The view stretched across the Willamette River to the snow-capped peaks of Mount Hood, a daily reminder that I'd chosen beauty and possibility over comfort and compromise. My coffee mug bore the logo of Morrison & Associates, where I'd quickly established myself as the creative force behind their most ambitious residential projects. The work challenged me in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Patricia Morrison had thrown me immediately into a complete home renovation for a tech executive who wanted his lake house to reflect both luxury and environmental consciousness. Every day brought new problems to solve, materials to source, and creative boundaries to push. I'd remembered why I'd fallen in love with design in the first place. The satisfaction of creating something beautiful and functional from nothing but vision and determination. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Reed, the structural engineer I'd been working with on the lake house project. Coffee before the site meeting? I found those reclaimed beams you wanted. Marcus had appeared in my life like an unexpected gift. A man whose passion for sustainable architecture matched my own commitment to thoughtful design. He was 42, divorced, and refreshingly honest about both his professional goals and personal limitations. Our collaboration had evolved naturally from professional respect to genuine friendship, to something deeper that neither of us was rushing to define. Perfect, I texted back. Meet you at Stumptown in 20 minutes. I dressed in jeans and a cashmere sweater, clothes that reflected my new life's balance between professional competence and personal comfort. The woman in the mirror looked rested, confident, and genuinely happy for the first time in years. She bore little resemblance to the exhausted wife who'd discovered a silver earring under her pillow and realized her marriage was a carefully constructed lie. The coffee shop was busy with Portland's morning rush, but Marcus had claimed a table by the window where he sat reviewing architectural drawings and making notes in the margins. He looked up when I approached, his face lighting, with the kind of smile that made my chest warm in ways I was still learning to trust. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, standing to kiss my cheek with the easy affection we'd developed over weeks of working closely together. "I think you're going to love what I found." We spent an hour discussing lumber specifications and installation timelines, but the conversation flowed easily between technical details and personal observations. Marcus listened when I spoke, asked thoughtful questions about my ideas, and treated my expertise with the respect David had never shown. The contrast was stark enough to make me wonder how I'd accepted so little for so long. "There's something else," Marcus said as we prepared to leave for the job site. "I got a call yesterday from someone claiming to be your husband. He wanted to know where you were working and whether I was the reason you'd left him." My stomach clenched. David had been calling and texting sporadically since I'd left Riverside, his messages cycling between angry accusations and desperate pleas for reconciliation. I'd blocked his number twice, but he'd apparently started using different phones to circumvent my attempts at establishing boundaries. "What did you tell him?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I told him I was your colleague and that your personal life was none of his business." Then I hung up. Marcus studied my face with concern. "Do I need to worry about this guy?" He sounded pretty unstable. "David's not dangerous, just entitled. He's having trouble accepting that actions have consequences, and that I'm not coming back to clean up his mess." Marcus reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it?" The offer was genuine, without pressure or hidden agenda. Marcus had never pushed for details about my marriage or divorce proceedings, accepting my explanations about needing space and time to rebuild my life. His patience was one of many qualities that made him unlike any man I'd been involved with before. "I'm okay," I said, and meant it. David's becoming someone else's problem now. The job site was a 2-hour drive into the mountains, winding through forests that were just beginning to show their autumn colors. Marcus drove while I reviewed our materials list and responded to emails from other clients. The easy silence between us felt comfortable rather than forced, the kind of natural compatibility I'd never experienced in my marriage. My phone rang as we reached the lake house, Amanda's name appearing on the screen. I'd spoken with her weekly since leaving Riverside, our friendship surviving the geographic distance and actually growing stronger now that I was happy again. "I have news," she said without preamble. "Both good and complicated." "Tell me the good news first." "Margaret's doing much better. Her new cardiologist has her on a medication regimen that's really helping, and she's been asking about visiting you in Portland." The thought of seeing Margaret again filled me with genuine joy. We'd spoken several times since I'd left, conversations that had only reinforced my certainty that our relationship transcended my connection to David. She'd been supportive of my decision to leave, even proud of my courage in choosing happiness over security. "That's wonderful. What's the complicated news?" Amanda sighed. "David and Nicole are getting married. He filed for divorce last month citing irreconcilable differences and apparently proposed to her the same day the papers were served." Waited for the news to hurt, for some surge of jealousy or regret to overwhelm me. Instead, I felt nothing more than mild curiosity about how quickly David had moved from devastated husband to eager groom. The speed of his transition revealed everything about both his character and the true nature of his feelings for me. "When's the wedding?" I asked. "Next month. And here's the really interesting part. Nicole's pregnant." That did surprise me, though not in the way Amanda probably expected. The timeline suggested that Nicole had been pregnant during David's desperate attempts to convince me to return to our marriage. He'd been pleading for reconciliation while planning a future with another woman and their unborn child. "Well," I said finally, "I guess that explains the rush to remarry." "Are you okay? I mean, really okay?" I looked out at the lake stretching toward the mountains, then at Marcus, who was unloading materials with the focused efficiency I'd come to admire. "I'm better than okay, Amanda. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The rest of the day passed. Quickly, Marcus and I working together to solve complex engineering challenges while the lake sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. We drove back to Portland as the sun set behind the coastal mountains, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold that made the whole world seem magical. "Dinner?" Marcus asked as we reached the city limits. "There's a new Ethiopian place I've been wanting to try." "I'd love that." Over dinner, I told Marcus about David's impending remarriage and Nicole's pregnancy. He listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and offering observations that helped me process the information without emotional turmoil. "How do you feel about becoming an ex-wife?" he asked as we shared dessert. "Relieved," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "It makes everything clean and final. No more ambiguity about what we were or what we might have been." Marcus smiled. "Good. Because I have to confess, the idea of you being technically married to someone else was making me a little crazy." The admission hung in the air between us, loaded with implications we'd been dancing around for weeks. I looked at this man who'd entered my life when I was rebuilding it from scratch, who'd shown me what partnership looked like when both people contributed equally and respected each other's strengths. "Marcus," I said softly, "I should probably mention that I'm falling in love with you." His face lit up with the kind of joy that made my chest tight with happiness. "Thank God," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I was wondering how long we were going to pretend this was just professional collaboration. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation from David and Nicole, forwarded through Amanda's address. The card was elegantly designed, probably Nicole's work, announcing their marriage at an exclusive resort outside Riverside. I studied the photograph of the happy couple, noting how David's smile looked exactly the same as it had in our own wedding photos years ago. I threw the invitation away without a second thought and called Margaret to confirm our plans for her visit to Portland the following weekend. She was coming to see my apartment and meet Marcus, but mostly she wanted to celebrate my success at Morrison & Associates, where I'd just been promoted to senior partner. That evening, Marcus and I walked along the waterfront, discussing our plans for a weekend trip to the coast and his latest project involving sustainable housing for low-income families. The conversation flowed naturally between personal dreams and professional goals, the kind of easy integration I'd never achieved with David. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked as we paused to watch the sunset reflect off the river. I thought about the question seriously, considering everything I'd lost and gained in the past year. The house in Riverside, the comfortable routines of marriage, the security of a known future, all traded for uncertainty and the hard work of rebuilding a life from scratch. "None," I said finally. "Not a single one." Marcus kissed me then, soft and sweet in the golden light of evening, and I realized that this was what happiness felt like when you chose it, instead of settling for what seemed safe. David had made room for someone else in our bed, but in doing so, he'd freed me to make room for myself in a life worth living. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.